What is stillness? Now, Google's definition is the absence of movement or sound. Now, as a video-focused person, there's been times where I've used static shots and they've turned out pretty okay. But personally, my shooting style has always incorporated movements from drastic movements to subtle ones. I recently watched a video by Dylan Batista talking about mastering stillness. He explains that movement is something that is to help support a video if there is meaning with the movement itself. Otherwise, it can be a distraction. Holding a still frame allows you to focus on what's in your composition and to pay attention to what's needed and what is not needed in the frame. Now, as an artist, I've always tried to improve. And I think that even though you might have years of experience, that there's always more for you to learn and more people to learn from. I'm friends with a lot of photographers, and one thing I've noticed that I think photographers do really well is holding a moment and taking a photo like it was set up on a tripod, hence stillness. You know, a good friend of mine, Peng, he's an amazing photographer and cinematographer. I feel has always had a good grasp of using still frames to just vlog his daily life. You know, they're beautifully shot, and even within a few seconds, he can get you to feel, even just for a little bit, how that moment probably felt to him at that time. And if you haven't checked out his content yet, I definitely recommend you do. He's an amazing photographer and cinematographer. I'll link it down below. As a video-focused person, you know, we're usually trained in a way of using movement to tell a story and to use static shots to establish a setting or emotion. Now, I can admit that I've only used static shots in either client work or, you know, personal projects. But lately I've been thinking about, well, I see people using stillness as a way to better tell stories, and I think it's probably my time to try to hone this part of the craft. So going into this, I started to think about, okay, how are lenses focal lengths going to help curate the overall composition and frames that I'd be shooting? And as a still frame, I thought that, you know, there's probably three options that I got to go off of right now, in my opinion. The first one is wide angle. Now, this gives you a full scope of a wider area and can show more of the environment, and in a way can convey things like individualism, loneliness, or on a happier note, you know, joy and freedom. Number two is a medium focal length. You know, this is where the lens is going to sit at a usually 28 to maybe 35 setting. Now, this can be more of a standard still shot to focus in on the individual or just to establish a shot. And number three is a tight focal length, and this is probably going to sit between a 50 to 75 millimeter focal length, but you could probably push it past. This is where the focal length is going to become a lot more intimate. You know, the more close the subject, the more it kind of can evoke a lot more personal feelings or, you know, intimacy in a sense. All these can relate to one another as long as you kind of pick and choose how your scene will look or play out. But in my opinion, these are kind of the focal lengths that strongly support on a basic level mastering stillness. You know, with that in mind, I wanted to start thinking about shots more intentionally and to see if I could kind of play around with these to see how they might play out. So I asked myself, you know, where do I start? And I thought back to when I started creating videos with, you know, no content to actually make. You know, I just started making vlogs from my daily days and things that I thought were kind of interesting in my life. So I kind of started just doing BTS for friends, trying this out, and to create frames with good compositions and exposure. You know, first was my friend Gus's brand shoot for his hat company. We went to his friend's house to mock up a campground off the lake. You know, my intention was to create frames that seemed interesting with multiple angles to show both the BTS process and the setting that we were in. That was my first true time that I think I actually focused on mainly just shooting still and static shots. You know, going forward, I want to start creating more artistic frames, pay more attention to composition, exposure, and what's actually on screen. Now, I got a lot more practice to do with this, and these are going to be incorporated more into my videos. And I think as an artist, we all feel like we kind of never really get to a point to where we're ever satisfied. And admittedly, this is kind of one of the reasons that I'm starting this, and I just want to improve. Once I kind of focus on this for a while, I might come back with an update, share with you guys what I've learned and, you know, takeaways of mastering stillness. But until then, Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you like the content, and I'll see you guys in the next one.